The studio lights were harsh, the atmosphere electric. In front of the cameras, two women sat opposite each other at a polished mahogany table. On one side was Elizabeth Sawyer, the famed journalist known for her piercing questions and unwavering composure. On the other side sat Marianne Gray, a former actress turned activist, recently thrust into global limelight for her outspoken views on royalty, identity, and media control. In the week leading up to this interview, tabloid whispers and social media speculation had swelled into a storm. Marianne's every move was dissected, her intentions questioned, her sincerity assailed. And Elizabeth, with her decades in journalism, was both feared and respected as someone who could dismantle narratives with a single question. From the moment the cameras went live, tension hummed like a charged wire. The show's host gave a brief introduction. "Good evening, viewers. Tonight, we bring you an exclusive, Marianne Gray, in her first televised interview since the controversy. Elizabeth Sawyer will ask the questions. Let's begin. A question for the ages." Elizabeth leaned forward. Her eyes were steady, her voice calm. "Marianne, many accuse you of seeking attention. They say your statements are provocations meant to polarize. How do you respond?" Marianne's throat tightened. She had anticipated this attack. Journalism interrogates, which is fair. But many of those accusations come from people uncomfortable with someone challenging old structures. Elizabeth nodded, then paused. "Are you then saying the critics are simply close-minded?" Marianne met her gaze. The lights reflected in her eyes, making her look more vulnerable than she felt. "No, I'm saying they fear change. They don't want voices that question privilege and secrecy. My statements shine a light on what many accept as normal." Elizabeth's composure didn't budge. She waited a beat, then asked, "So you admit your rhetoric is deliberately provocative?" That question landed harder than Marianne expected. The live audience held its breath. Marianne's voice wavered. "No. It's forceful. It's meant to challenge, but not to provoke aimlessly." Elizabeth's next question was sharper. "In your recent essay, you dismissed certain royal traditions as archaic and symbolic. Yet you married into circles that revere those very traditions. Isn't that hypocrisy?" Marianne's cheeks flushed. She took a moment. "I see your point. But I married for love, not for titles. And I believe we can respect traditions while reforming them. Critique doesn't equal betrayal." The host interjected, "Viewers, this interview is heating up. The turning point." Elizabeth pressed on. "Let's talk about your public engagements. Last month, you declined several invitations citing misalignment of values. But documents have surfaced showing you had been negotiating those same events behind the scenes. Why the inconsistency?" Gasps rippled through the studio. Cameras zoomed in on Marianne. She exhaled slowly, feeling cornered. I deemed those negotiations preliminary. At a point I realized I couldn't sign on to something I didn't believe in. I backed out before final agreements were made." Elizabeth stared. She didn't smile, but the tension in her posture said all she needed. "Many believe those negotiations were to boost your standing, relationships, influence, endorsements. Was that your plan?" Marianne's composure cracked. Her hands trembled in her lap. "No," she started, "my goal has always been advocacy, meaningful change. Everything else I've pursued is a channel, not an end." Elizabeth leaned back and said in a softer but still controlled tone. "Because, Marianne, the public looks for integrity. When people see contradictions, trust erodes. My job is to dig beneath the rhetoric and find truth." The cameras cut to commercial break. In the wings, her team whispered and scrambled. Marianne slumped in her chair, breathing hard. Backstage, a producer approached her. "You did well. But you need to be ready, Sawyer is relentless." Marianne nodded, but inside she felt shaken. She had entered hoping to control the narrative. Now she wondered, had the narrative swallowed her? At the end of the night, after the lights went off and the studio emptied, Marianne returned home to the echoing silence of her living quarters. The walls, framed with awards and photos, felt colder now. The glare of the interview replayed in her mind. Had she been humiliated? Or had she merely been forced to reveal more of herself, claims, fears, contradictions, than she intended? The morning after the interview, Marianne Gray's face dominated every screen. Clips of the sharp exchanges, especially Elizabeth Sawyer's most stinging questions, were replayed endlessly on television, social media, and even late-night comedy. Exposed. Cornered. Humiliated. The headlines were merciless. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from her publicist, messages from allies, and a flood of hate comments that stung more than she wanted to admit. One trending hashtag simply read, #Sawyer wins. Behind the curtain. Inside her townhouse, Marianne sat at the kitchen table with her husband, Daniel, who silently scrolled through the articles. His expression was calm, though his knuckles whitened on the phone. "They're saying I looked weak," Marianne whispered, staring into her untouched cup of tea. "You didn't look weak," Daniel said firmly. "You looked human. And that's what they'll never admit, because people want either a saint or a villain. Nothing in between." Marianne sighed. "But I am in between. And no one wants to see that." Daniel reached for her hand. "Then show them anyway. The countermove. That afternoon, Marianne's team convened in her living room. Advisors, PR strategists, and a media coach crowded around. "We need to get ahead of this," her publicist insisted. "A written statement, clarifying your position." "No," Marianne cut in. "If I hide behind a statement, they'll say I'm too afraid to speak. If I issue apologies, they'll say Sawyer broke me. That interview wasn't the end of my story." Her media coach leaned forward. "Then what do you propose?" Marianne's eyes hardened with resolve. "Another appearance. But not with Sawyer. Somewhere else. My voice, my terms. I won't let humiliation define me." A surprising alley. 2 days later, an unexpected message arrived. Elizabeth Sawyer herself had sent it. "Greater than, Marianne. You handled the interview better than you think. You stood your ground. The backlash isn't the interview, it's the audience's discomfort. If you'd like, I'd be willing to sit down again, off camera, to talk." Elizabeth. Marianne reread the message 3 times. Her team urged her to ignore it. "It's a trap," one advisor warned. But deep down, Marianne felt something else: respect. Elizabeth had challenged her, brutally, even. But maybe not out of malice. Maybe out of principle. The second meeting. A week later, in a quiet Manhattan cafe, Marianne and Elizabeth met without cameras, without scripts. Elizabeth broke the silence first. "You're not the first to stumble in front of me, Marianne. And you won't be the last. But you're different. You care about your causes. You just don't know yet how to defend them without emotion." Marianne frowned. "So you think I'm naive?" Elizabeth's lips curved into a thin smile. "I think you're still learning how to carry truth without letting it crush you." For the first time, Marianne felt seen, not as a headline, not as a spectacle, but as a person struggling to balance conviction with vulnerability. The redemption. Weeks later, Marianne reappeared on television, not in a combative interview, but in a candid conversation hosted by a younger journalist. She spoke openly about mistakes, contradictions, and lessons learned. This time, her words resonated. "I'm not perfect," she admitted to millions watching. "But I believe speaking up, even imperfectly, is better than silence." The backlash softened. Support grew louder. And the hashtag shifted. #GraySpeaks began trending. Epilogue. Months later, Marianne received a handwritten note in the mail. "Greater than, Marianne. You've found your footing. Keep going. Remember, truth isn't about winning, it's about enduring. E. Sawyer." Marianne folded the note and placed it in her journal. Humiliation had nearly broken her, but it had also carved her into something stronger. For the first time in a long while, she smiled at the reflection in the mirror, not as a victim of media firestorms, but as a woman who had learned to stand in them without being consumed.